When I was drafted into the United States Army as a volunteer, and I was a person who was happy to go to Fort Ord to basic training, I was a volunteer for a 2-year term. I volunteered for the draft in 1965. And at the end of that time, as I said, I had no orders, but I eventually ended up, and the reason there were no orders is because I was being investigated so that they could or not give me a security clearance for cryptographic materials. Because they had already planned that if I passed the security examination, I would become a member of the National Security Agency, who would be a counterintelligence agent, one whose job was to protect cryptographic equipment, cryptographic codes, and the loyalty of the men operating our codes and the code machines. And that worked out. At Fort Wainwright, I was drafted into when I came back in proper uniform and shaven and cleaned up with a haircut, I came back to Mr. Norris inside the vault, inside a vault, inside a vault, and found I'd been drafted into the National Security Agency. And I was there for counterintelligence and protection of codes, code equipment, and the loyalty of the men that operated that equipment and their safety. So I began training there, and I already had an extraordinary background in such techniques, of course, from the age of 12. I'd been a hunter, a fisherman. And before that, I'd been a counterintelligence agent since I was 4 years old. What I did as a counterintelligence agent at the age of 4 was dress in rags with my father's rubber barn boots, shodding my feet, and then I would walk along the Green River bank about half a mile that we had along our property. We had an area where fishermen would come along this, and we also had an area where we sold fruit and vegetables, a stand by Green River Valley Road. And I would take over from my older brothers and sisters as the salesman for fruits and vegetables, which would work only on weekends because we were within half a mile of the Flaming Geyser Park. That park is joined with the farm property that I grew up on and is a county park of King County in Washington State. And as I said, in a matter of years, will become a national monument for me. I'll be dead. I won't care. I don't care today. But it will happen in the course of history. That's what happens. And I would sell fruit and vegetables in my undercover role as a crippled, speech defective, very mentally challenged child. And I would have one good leg and one good arm. And I would walk back and forth in front of our vegetable and fruit stand as people were headed on weekends and holidays to the Flaming Geyser Park to picnic and fish and recreate. And they would see me, though. It'd form something in their head as they went by. And we had a lot of people that would stop on the way back. Having thought about it, felt guilty that they didn't care about humanity, and by God, coming back to wherever they were going home to, would stop. And find out that not only was I crippled, but I was deaf, and I was very intellectually defective. Even more than today. And I could sell flats of vegetables and fruit at tremendously inflated prices from what my other brothers and sisters could sell them for. Because I was very intellectually retarded, very crippled, and deaf. And all I'd had as an act was this terrible limp that they saw on their way to the park. But I learned by the age of 4 that admissions against interest are almost universally accepted by people. They believe admissions against interest almost all the time. And if someone is acting very intellectually challenged, deaf, crippled, dressed in rags, they believe all of it and more. So I was very successful at that. At the age of 4, I started conning fishermen out of steelhead and rainbow trout during different seasons of the year. There was the first time that I recall consciously getting someone's steelhead. It was Judge Long, who was a Superior Court judge in King County. And that was in 1947 in the winter. He had a very nice steelhead laying on the bank. He and his son were fishing. They were out in the shallow water. And I came along, crippled, speech defective, deaf, mentally challenged to an extraordinary degree. And I petted the dead fish, this great steelhead, about a 12-pounder, and I yelled out to Judge Long and his son, Alva Long, 50 thick, 50 thick, 50 thick. I take home mommy, C6. And I'm cleaning up my accent a little bit so it's easier to understand the listener. They were so taken by the presence of this crippled child trying to help the fish by taking it home to the mother to fix that they let me have it. And I did take it home to my mother to fix, and a lot of starts and stops dragging this fish as I got to our farmhouse. And she fixed it by baking it and did a good job fixing that fish. And from then on, until I was about 14, they used to regularly let me have their steelhead trout in the spring and summer and their steelhead in the fall fishing season. And I would bring them home to Mother to fix. Until one day, my younger sister and I were performing our professional wrestling acts, tributes to the professional wrestling channel it was on, one of the 3 channels that we had on our television. And they saw me at 14, not totally crippled, not speech defective, not deaf, not mentally challenged enormously, but saw me as I was and burst into laughter and loved it. And I was a friend of the son, and even to near the point of his death. He turned out to be an absolutely brilliant attorney. And this man and his son were influences on me in my life. I thought it would be a great idea to study law, to learn about the law. And I also thought about using the law to help the Muckleshoot Indian tribe. The Muckleshoot Indian Reservation was about 12 miles from our farm by road. Fewer miles across the woods. And I saw how terribly they were treated by regular whites, both farmers and the townspeople in Auburn, Washington. And it got me angry. By the time I was tough enough in the 3rd grade, I stopped harassment against Muckleshoot Indian children by catching people from behind in the school grounds and knocking them out from behind. I've never fought fair in my life. I don't believe in it. I have always fought as a hunter, as a trapper. Never fair. And unfortunately, that molded me. So it's both good and bad. I developed a very poignant appreciation of the despicable nature of white supremacy, of white ability to believe themselves superior to people of other colors and to act on that. And it's given me a huge part of my personality in my life. In Vietnam, I saw black soldiers racially discriminate against Vietnamese citizens. And I certainly got lessons in the universality of prejudice racially. And I also saw at the University of Washington in 1961 in the fall, when I first went there, the tremendous prejudice against people of lesser talents intellectually, and of people who didn't have the wherewithal to attend the University of Washington and weren't becoming sophisticated scholars, or what passed for the same. And I didn't like it. And I also saw how students, faculty, the whole University of Washington community could manage to ignore people in trouble, physically, emotionally, racially, in terms of gender, etc. And I didn't like it. And that has been the bane of my life.